Welcome everyone to our February speakers series with IPPNWC. Our speaker today is Dr. Jonathan Down, who is president of IPPNWC. He graduated from St. Bartholomew's Hospital Medical College in London in 1975, and he is trained as a general pediatrician before undertaking subspecialty training in developmental pediatrics in Vancouver BC. He is a great addition to our IPPNWC group and organization, and we are so thrilled to have him as our speaker today. And I will pass it off to him right now.
Thank you very much, Marguerite. And I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we're on today. While we're meeting on a virtual platform, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands known as Turtle Island, which we all call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitments and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. Coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territories of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. And thank you all for joining us for the, actually it's the second in the active members sessions. The first was in January, and we had a get-together, a brainstorming session, and which was very, very productive and helpful in terms of generating ideas for our organization. And I see a host of people here today who are newcomers to IPPNWC, and I'd like to, I can't go through everyone, but I see Tamara is here, Tamara Lawrence, and I see also Ruth Mitchell, who is chair of IPPNW. Ruth is going to be our guest speaker on March the 9th. And Ruth tells me that she was in the room when ICANN was actually conceived at the original gestational period of ICANN, and is now chair of the board of IPPNW. So we'll look forward very much to hearing from Ruth on March the 9th. And I would also like to say that anyone who is not an active member who would like to become an active member, please contact Marguerite or Leah. And there is a minimal formality in terms of application. There's no fee, but it is an opportunity for us to meet on a regular basis and tap into the resources and knowledge and expertise of many people from around the world. Actually, we've had folks from Kazakhstan, from Australia, and next month, of course, we'll be hearing from Ruth, who's actually an Australian, but actually she's Canadian, but is working as a neurosurgeon in Sydney, Australia, and doing a pediatric fellowship in Europe in neurosurgery at the BC Children's Hospital. So we're very lucky that she's in our local neighborhood, as it were. So I'd like to start out, I'll talk a little bit, then I'll show a video, which is a disturbing video. I'm leaving it to the very end because it is disturbing. I don't want to muddy the water, as it were, by the nature of the video, but you'll see what I mean when you watch it. And also, of course, you know, with technical issues being technical issues, I wanted to leave it to the very end just in case we have a glitch, but I hope not. So, so how is it that, you know, in doing our very best to achieve one thing, for example, protecting the security and safety of Canada, we end up achieving the opposite. So there exists an unseen force, and with an unassuming name that conceals all manner of harms, and it's called unintended consequences. And it takes our efforts to do the good and right thing, and it turns them to ashes and blows them away in our faces. So this, unfortunately, is what's happening with the proposed purchase of the fighter jets. And whether it was a good or a right thing or not to begin with, it certainly has turned into a range of issues, which I'd like to very briefly talk about this evening. And so I'm going to go to share screen. and go to that and share. And here we go. And I hope everyone can see that. Are we good?
Yes, we're good, Jonathan. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the health and safety consequences of fighter jets. Now, this comes from an American journalist who wrote, "For every complex problem, there is an answer, but it's clear, simple, and wrong." And I'm going to preface my comments this evening by saying that the purchase of fighter jets is a wrong decision. And it's not as though I'm biased in any way. And I must say, I do not have any shares in Glaxo, and I do not have any shares in Northrop Grumman or in Lockheed Martin. But the title of this talk is Missiles, Not Medicine, Not Missiles. And so I want to be upfront on this, but this is a complex issue, and there is no simple answer for this issue of national, what we call national security. So why now? Well, the fleet of Canadian CF-18s is more than 40 years old, and the story of the replacement or procurement, as it's called, of the aging fleet of CF-18s is underway. It has been underway for some time, and the sticker price currently is at $19 billion for the replacement of the jets, with a lifetime cost, and this is an accurate lifetime cost of $77 billion. This is not chump change. The two contenders are the Lockheed Martin F-35 and the Saab Gripen. There was a third contender of the Boeing, which was excluded by the Canadian government a little while ago. So Canada has already paid approximately $1 billion in development costs into the F-35. So that fact, together with the interoperability within NATO and NORAD, is highly suggests that the Lockheed Martin F-35 will win the bid. Now, what is a fighter jet? Well, it's a weapon of war, and it's involved in air-to-air combat, airstrikes, ground strikes, and it's equipped with missiles and bombs. And it avoids the concept of boots on the ground, and it sort of speaks to the so-called over-the-horizon idea. People can be, the enemy can be attacked without any soldiers on the ground, and that's the kind of move, certainly with drones and with the F-35, that's taking place. So one of the things about the F-35 is it has stealth capability. So this is not a defensive operation. This is an attack operation. So one of the pitches is that it avoids radar. Well, you only avoid radar if you're in an attack mode. And you'll see in the video, hopefully, this has significant implications for the nuclear bomb, which is available for the F-35. So it is a nuclear weapon capability, and the fighter jet has no humanitarian value whatsoever. It's not like a Hercules jet that can do food drops on a beach or pick up people from a humanitarian situation. There's no humanitarian value whatsoever. It's a single operator. There's a single pilot with an intensive capacity for death and destruction. It's the most expensive weapon system ever invented. And it has 300,000 parts assembled in 1,900 suppliers around the world. And it's the so-called digital jet for the modern battle space. And it's fitted with advanced sensors fusion for electronic warfare. So it's enabling it to locate and track enemy forces and jam radars. So again, I will reiterate the fact that this is not a defensive jet. One of the unintended consequences of the production of a fighter jet is the huge consumption of rare earth metals. And there is definitely a link between militarism and what's called extractivism, maybe a term that you're familiar with, but extraction of rare earth elements, particularly from Africa and South America. And here's just a very brief list of some of the rare earth elements I've never heard of. Indium, for example, and neodymium and tantalum, aluminium, of course, and beryllium we've heard about. So there's a whole range of rare earth elements which are required for the production of fighter jets. And in fact, I'll give you a reference at the very end. Without rare earth elements, there would be no weapons. There would be no fighter jets. So it's become so sophisticated, the production has become so sophisticated that these rare earth elements are a definite prerequisite for the production of any fighter jets. So the intended consequences, there's an overlap here between intended and unintended. They are lethal weapons. They're designed to fight both United States wars and NATO wars of aggression. And overseas, Canada's new fighter jets would drop bombs, including potentially nuclear weapons, destroying communities and killing people. Canada has already been involved in wars of aggression, including former Yugoslavia, in Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, and Iraq. And so in terms of, I just want to quote a legal expert who was giving testimony before Canada's Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Trade. And he's talking about Serbia and Montenegro operations where Canada fighter jets flew 678 sorties that killed between 500 and 2,000 civilians. His name was Michael Mandela, and he stated that the NATO bombing was flatly illegal. The health consequences come from the United States Air Force environmental impact statement. And so this one is 2012, there's an updated one. And we had benefit of listening to a group based in Burlington, Vermont, a few months ago, who have been subject to noise pollution. And they didn't have the financial resources to be able to conduct their own noise assessment. So they used the federal information, and this is what they looked at. And so this is a public health review, and it shows noise pollution is a huge issue. Fighter jets such as the X-35 will produce above 121 decibels of sound. They create sonic booms. They can trigger anxiety, headaches, panic attacks. Fighter jet noise can also be associated with hearing loss and auditory distress. But it's also interesting to note that noise pollution is also associated with cardiovascular disease, ischemic heart disease. It's associated with memory deficits. It's associated with learning difficulties, sleep difficulties, and there are a host of unintended consequences which are identified in the paper that I've just referenced. So they're also toxic. The F-35 is made of 40% composite plastic. And so a crash, and by the way, there have been many crashes of the F-35. The most recent was in the South China Sea last month when an F-35 crashed into the USS Carl Vinson, I believe is the name of the aircraft carrier, sank. And each F-35 would, as I've mentioned, carry a significant amount of rare earth elements. the mining, I should have mentioned that the mining of these rare earth elements generates a huge amount of toxic waste and tailings ponds, and it pollutes the environment and often displaces indigenous communities. An F-35 consumes more fuel and emits more carbon in one long-range flight than a typical automobile emits in a year. And one of the things that was only recently recognized at COP26 in Glasgow, it was the first time that military-related emissions were identified as a major issue. Prior to COP26, it had not been recognized as the pollutants, the emissions, the greenhouse gases were not even measured within national quotas. And in last year, the Liberal government committed to cutting greenhouse emissions by 45%. But given the potential toxicity of the emissions from the F-35 or the fighter jets, we would not be able to meet our commitments by 2030. And of course, $77 billion would go a long way to doing other more care-orientated activities. Basic income, housing, healthcare, and as is mentioned here, we could even fund an independent Canadian foreign policy and with new diplomatic roles to ensure a peaceful future. And of course, Canadians don't want fighter jets. A 2015 forum poll showed that 38% of Canadians think we need these jets. In 2021, across the country, there were multiple actions held in response to the pending purchase. And as you can see here, most of these slides, I should say, I'll show you at the very end, have been taken from a very good brochure, which has been developed by the No Fighter Jets Coalition, which I'll show you in a moment. So $77 billion, the estimated cost of improving water and wastewater systems in Indigenous communities between 3.5 to 4.7 billion, and the amount requested by the Canadian Association for Long-Term Care, an issue that's come to the surface during the pandemic to address the crisis, 3.14. And this is another, I've borrowed this information from Tamara Lorenz's report, which is just, I saw the preface last week, but the final edition is was available today. So this lists Canadian-based alternatives to the $19 billion price tag for the 88 fighter jets. And you can see there's a whole range of options that would be much more care-oriented rather than war-oriented. Housing units, solar panels, light rail transit, elementary schools, high schools, Indigenous wellness centers, state-of-the-art healthcare complexes, and recreation centers. I thought I'd put this one up just to personalize the story. You probably heard that they've had a boil water advisory and have been shipping in water into this First Nations community since 1995. So it's 27 years of living in this community. And this is just a picture of someone unloading the 1.5 liters of water which they have been given. I'm sure you've all followed that story. So Canada does not need fighter jets, period. And this is a quote from Charles Nixon, who was the Deputy Minister of National Defense from 1975 to 1983. And he says, the only credible aerial threat to Canadian territory, sovereignty, and the population is a copycat 9/11 attack, a danger that essentially cannot be defeated by fighter aircraft. Natural disasters at home or abroad would not require fighters, but would require helicopters transport aircraft, and other forms of military assistance. Now, just in case you thought that this is not possible, it was possible in New Zealand. Helen Clark, who was the Prime Minister of New Zealand back in 2000, cancelled the deal for an F-16, and she scrapped the fighter wing of the Royal New Zealand Air Force. So it was done. It is done. Can be done. And what can we do? His group of famous Canadians who have signed on to the in opposition to the not only the cancelling of the purchase, but also elimination of fighter jets, period. We don't need them. And here's you can see here a list of actions that were taken across the country, actually, including here in Victoria. Okay, so things that you can do. I would suggest that you look up www.nofighterjets.ca. It's a great resource. Other things. This is the brochure that I've extracted. You can see this is actually been really nicely produced. This is another resource that you might like to look up as well. It comes from London Mining Network, and it makes the direct link between militarism and extractivism. And another thing you can do, Tamara has been a strong leader on this, and this is her petition, which goes to the House of Commons, and you could sign the petition, and the details are at the top here. And she might like to say a little bit more about that in our discussion. This is her report for Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. And again, I put the website at the top. And tomorrow, Dan Grazier, who's a former captain in the Air Force, I believe, is giving his take on why we should not be buying the F-35. And he works for an organization called POGO, which is the Project on Government Oversight. And I think that would be worthwhile participating in. Now, I have the video, and I'm going to push the button and hope it comes up. Yeah, it looks like it is.
A significant development is taking place. A round of flight tests, which are part of the integration of the new B-6112 nuclear gravity bomb onto the F-35A Joint Strike Fighter, has been completed. These tests were conducted by U.S. Sandia National Laboratories in cooperation with Los Alamos National Laboratory and the U.S. Air Force. The press release from Sandia said that the supersonic tests had taken place over the Tonopah test range on August 25th. Viewers may note that the range is a secretive site inside the huge Nevada test and training range and has been used for the R&D of secretive projects as well as testing of nuclear weapons. The F-35A dropped the test B-6112, which included functional non-nuclear components and simulated nuclear components from an altitude of 10,500 feet. It took approximately 42 seconds for the bomb to hit the designated target on the range. Brian Adkins, the range manager of the facility, said in a statement, "We successfully executed this historic first ever F-35A flight test at Tonopah Test Range within the specified delivery criteria." The U.S. military expects the B-6112, also known as the B-61 Mod 12, to replace all existing versions of B-61. That includes the B-61 3, 4, 7, and 11 in the active stockpile. In this video, Defense Updates analyzes why F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, armed with B-6112 nuclear bomb, will be a major headache for Russia and China. Let's get started. This video is sponsored by War Thunder, the most comprehensive military vehicle online game for PC, PlayStation 4, and Xbox One, in which you can go to battle on more than 1,200 playable aircraft, tanks, helicopters, and ships from the 1930s to the 1990s. The game has an amazing attention to detail and focuses on a realistic combat experience, which is why knowing your vehicles and skill really makes a difference. It's easy to get into, and all you need to play is nothing more but your mouse and keyboard or controller. Immerse yourself in cross-platform combat with more than 20 million other military vehicle enthusiasts from all over the world. Download and play War Thunder for free using the link in the description below, and also get a free bonus tank, aircraft, or ship, and 3 days of premium account. The B-6112 is a cooperative effort between the Air Force and NNSA, or National Nuclear Security Administration. The U.S. Air Force is responsible for acquiring the Boeing-designed GPS-assisted inertial navigation system, INS, directed tail kit. The kit has tail fins to control the bomb's downward descent and will enable it to dive down on the target with high accuracy. The bomb also uses rockets in the main body to spin stabilize it in flight and improve its accuracy. NNSA is responsible for developing the bomb's main assembly and integrating the actual nuclear warhead on live weapons. The bomb's exact power remains classified. Some reports indicate the warhead will have a maximum yield of approximately 50 kilotons. To give viewers a perspective, here's a comparison. Trinity test in New Mexico in July 1945, which ushered in the nuclear age, had a yield of 20 kilotons. Hiroshima's Little Boy bomb had a yield of 13 to 18 kilotons, whereas Nagasaki's Fat Man bomb had a yield of 20 to 22 kilotons of TNT. B-6112 is expected to have a dial-a-yield capability, which can limit the extent of the nuclear reaction inside the warhead to lower the explosive force. This way, a B-61 Mod 12 will be able to replace different bombs that have predefined explosive yields. B-61 Mod 12 will also replace the B-6111 bunker buster variant. In 2014, former U.S. Air Force Chief of Staff General Norton Schwartz, speaking at an event at the Stimson Center think tank in Washington, D.C., suggested that the guidance kit on the B-6112 will enable it to destroy hardened underground targets without any specialized bunker busting variant, as the blast's impact will be very focused due to the high accuracy. The Lockheed Martin F-35 Lightning II, which is a single-seat, single-engine, all-weather, stealth, multi-role fighter, is undergoing final development and testing by the United States. The Pentagon began the F-35 program in 2001 with an aim to develop a cost-effective replacement for the U.S. military's F-15 fighters, F-16 and F-18 fighter bombers and reconnaissance aircraft, and A-10 close-in support warplanes. The F-35 has three main models: the conventional takeoff and landing F-35A, CTOL, the short takeoff and vertical landing F-35B, STOVL, and the catapult-assisted takeoff but arrested recovery carrier-based F-35C, CATOBAR. Apart from the United States, the primary customer and financial backer, the United Kingdom, Italy, the Netherlands, Canada, Turkey, now removed, Australia, Norway, and Denmark are also part of the program. Many other nations like Japan and Israel are also deploying the fighters. The major partner nations, including the US, plan to acquire over 2,000 F-35s through 2035, which, if delivered, will make the F-35 one of the most numerous jet fighters. The fighter aircraft are expected to remain in service beyond 2050. F-35, being a fifth-generation fighter, is developed from the ground up to be stealthy. Its external structure is designed to deflect signals away from the emitting radar, which makes it hard to detect or track. This is done by having no sharp edges or protruding elements and having a smooth external curvature. The test was particularly significant since the F-35A will carry the B-6112 internally. A total of 400 B-61 Mod 12 are expected to be developed. Apart from B-2 bombers, the bombs will be integrated into dual-purpose combat jets, such as the F-16 and F-15 Strike Eagle. The U.S. Air Force plans to integrate the B-6112 on the future B-21 Raider bomber, also that will replace B-2. Viewers may note that a nuclear-capable cruise missile is being developed for both B-2 and the B-52 bombers. But the advantage of B-6112 is that more B-6112s could be carried by B-2 or the future B-21 Raider when compared to the cruise missile, and hence more targets could be neutralized in a single sortie. The bombers, as well as any smaller jets carrying the nuclear bombs, though being vulnerable to counterattacks, are an important part of America's nuclear triad, since this option offers much better flexibility. Bombers and fighters can shift target or abort mission entirely, even at the very last stage, when compared to missile-armed planes or sea or ground-launched cruise or ballistic missiles. Being stealthy, F-35 will be hard to detect and can penetrate well-defended airspace. Clearly, B-61 Mod 12 will be an important part of America's nuclear deterrence going forward. While the U.S. is in the final stage of integrating a powerful and accurate nuclear bomb in its stealth fighter, Russia and China are still unable to get a proper fifth-generation fighter off the ground. Russian Su-57 is thought to have suspect stealth characteristics and is also years away from serial production. Chinese J-20 is having engine issues and also has stealth-related problems. So the U.S. is far ahead in this game.
Every time I watch that, it just leaves me breathless. And I'm sure it did with you as well. The idea that this could be thought of as a game. And it's the video was sponsored by War Thunder. And they talk at the very end about China and Russia being in a game. One of the things that they don't mention, but you probably know, is that the variable yield on the B60 is part of its so-called characteristics. What that means is that you can, it's almost like dial a bomb. You can go from 0.5 kilotons to 20 to 25 kilotons, depending on the target. So that increases its utility. The fact that it's in a stealth bomber, hidden inside a stealth bomber, also increases the risk that it could be mistaken for something, for a conventional weapon. There are a whole range of issues which of concern for us for IPPNWC, and whether Canada buys the F-35 and whether there'll be a sort of an upgrade to a B-60 or not. We don't know that because the decision hasn't been made yet. But anyway, I thought I would open it up for comments and questions now. And Marguerite will handle the comments and questions, and we can have a discussion about the F-35, and then, of course, if you wish, about the B-60-12.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for speaking today. I'll just stop the recording.